Welcome back for another chapter of Follow My Shadow. This story contains triggers for substance abuse and is not intended for children. Thank you. Chapter 2. Parking in a secluded area, Lana and John set to getting the campfire ready for their night. Their friendship was still strong, but the words a month ago from Sean still stung. And it was a long 3-day weekend. The distraction was definitely needed. She just wished things were a little different. She wished things were more like they had been earlier in the summer. This new monkey was not fun, not for her, and she could not see how it could be fun for him either. Lana knew this was going to be the last weekend she was spending this way. She couldn't do this any longer. It was wearing her down. She was in no way going to spend God only knows how long holding things together while he was having fun getting his fix. Sitting in her camp chair, she got her sandwich out and offered John a bite, full well knowing that he would decline. He barely ever ate when he was drinking and getting high, unless it was with weed. Then watch out, there was nothing safe. John moved his chair so he was sitting across the fire from her. He always did this before he got out his stuff. He always had laughed at her how she called everything he used his stuff. He walked over to the truck and got out a couple of bags, walked back over to Lana and kissed her on top of the head. She smiled up at him and watched him walk over and sit down. He tucked the small bag between his legs. She knew what would be in there, but was curious as to what was in the big bulky bag. It wasn't long before she saw what it was, and it shocked her. John slunk back in his chair with a grin on his face like a kid in a candy shop. He reached in the canvas bag and slowly pulled out a gas mask. Not like those that you see most people that are plastic and gray and used to filter out dust and mold, but would have been used in war times for military use. It had goggles and a nose piece, a long one, that covered your nose and mouth to filter air. It was ugly and frightening, but to John it seemed to be a thing of beauty. He held it up. Look at that, princess. What do you think of that? Pretty cool, huh? He slipped it over his head, looked around, pulled it back off. Yeah, baby, this is going to be awesome. Where did you get that? She didn't tell him that it horrified her. I got it from a friend. It's like new. You see, this is what you do. He went on to give her the basics on how he was going to use the mask to get the ultimate high. They say this will give it legs for days. He kept looking at it with awe. Lana thought, legs for days? What he's using doesn't need legs for days. I can barely handle him just using and holding him while he falls apart. She was tired of holding him together, tired of being the princess. She was ready to be just her, just a mom, a working mom, and nothing more. John helped her get some more firewood, telling her it may be a long night. He got out a rope from under the seat to tie down the tarp over the back of the truck and laid out the sleeping bags. "Hey babe, check out this cool new knife," and he held it up. "Well, that's pretty. I like the deer etched on the blade." Cutting the last rope, John sliced his finger with his new knife. "Wow, that's sharp." Blood was squirting everywhere. He tried to wrap his shirt around it to stop the bleeding, but it wasn't working. "We better get some Band-Aids on that," Lana told him. They went to the passenger side of the truck. John sat on the seat while Lana wrapped his finger with gauze, then tape, trying to get it to stay to his calloused fingers and stop the bleeding. "Looks like a friggin' murder scene in here," he joked, and tried to wipe the blood off the seat and off the truck, then grabbed a bottle of water from the floorboard and had Lana hold out her hands as he poured some water into them so she could wash the blood from them. "I'm sorry, beautiful." "It's okay. You're the one with the boo-boo. You have to go to work and try to keep it clean." Lana grinned, then stuck her tongue out at him. "Smart ass. Man, that's a lot of blood," he laughed. John and Lana talked for a bit. Then he pulled out his bag. Lana watched as he stared a moment, looking at what he was holding. His words, "legs for days," still echoing in her ears. John had been doing a lot of thinking. He wasn't getting any younger. He was looking at his kids getting old enough to be working and moving out on their own, graduating school. He still didn't know what had been bothering Lana. He had tried to talk to her, but she had assured him that it had nothing to do with wanting to have a more serious relationship. "I've been thinking," John started. Lana looked up from her book. She was reading. It was a distraction from what he was about to do. "I know that this really can't be fun for you, sitting out here in the woods while I'm getting all screwed up. I mean, I love it that you're here for me. I know you hold it all together while I'm screwed up, but it's not fair for you." Lana's breath caught. Her first thought that he was dumping her. Not that it was a bad thing necessarily, but it's always a bit of a shock when things come to an end, even if it is mutual. But what he was about to say was not what she expected to hear from him. "Honestly, I'm getting tired of chasing the next high. It's getting harder and harder, and I don't know how to stop. I don't know what the first step is, other than to tell you, baby. This is the last time. I can't continue like this. I promise, babe. After tonight, things will be different. I will change, I promise. I can do this. I have to. For my kids, for you, for me." John looked Lana straight in the eyes. There was no smile, just a look of pure sincerity. "I'll be there if you need me to." "I know you will be, Princess." But Lana knew the monkey was still on his back and watched as he experimented. She watched him raising concern and fear as he breathed in deep through the ugly mask, as his head went back, then slowly side to side, and listened to his breathing, labored, and his laugh like she had never heard before, and she knew the night had just begun. John placed the mask over his face. fitting it just snug enough to be comfortable but easy enough to pull off. Then got everything ready. The monkey on his back urged him on, drove him to keep going, fueling his desire to reach that next high, which would end up bringing him to the biggest breaking point in his life. John breathed in deep. His eyes closed, then opened, then rolled back. He could see things but couldn't tell what they were. They were just out of his view. He could look up to see it, but it was gone. There it was. It moved. He turned to try to follow it, but it was gone. He kept following it, side to side. There were voices way off, soft voices. What was it saying? He could see it. The voices had color. He tried to see it, but it kept moving slowly. He would try to find it. John? John, are you okay? Lana was worried. She had seen him in many ways, but this was new. Hey, what are you looking at? Are you doing okay? Do you need to have me come over and take that off? John? He wasn't responding. John breathed in deep. Another hit. It rolled into his brain like a wave, a purple wave, one he could see. It was all in colors, and now it sparkled. He reached out to touch it. He could see his hand in front of himself. It was layered in colors, greens and yellows and oranges. He watched as he flexed his fingers, made a fist, turned his hand over and around, held up his other hand, and watched them both in wonderment. Londa watched John. The fear prickled at her neck. This was not like him. She wondered what he was doing, what he was seeing. It worried her that he wasn't answering her. It was like he wasn't hearing her at all. She knew at this point he was unreachable. But she knew she wouldn't give up. She also knew chances were he would never quit. She watched as he breathed in deep again, taking in more of the drug. Watched as he visibly shook. She never understood why people did this to feel good. Guessed that you had to be a person that used to be able to understand. Fear and panic made it hard for her to breathe. There was a tightening in the base of her throat. She looked at the truck. Her mind was going over scenarios, how she could get out of there if need to be, with or without John. She could hear sounds coming from John, but she couldn't tell if he was talking or if he was just making sounds. The ugly mask was still on his head, covering his face. The goggle part over his eyes now were reflecting the fire, giving them an even more horrid look, if that was even a possibility. His movements were jerky, becoming more and more dramatic. The sounds were intelligible. They were definitely not words. She realized that the keys were on John's belt loop. Could she get them from him? Would he understand her enough to give them to her? She knew she had to try. John? Hey, I have an idea. Let me turn the truck around so the back is towards the fire. There was no response. John? John? She walked over cautiously to him. She instantly realized her mistake. He jumped from his chair, searching wildly around, like he couldn't see her standing in front of him. She slowly backed off and sat back down. John was still crouching half behind his chair, still searching around, first one way, then the next. After several minutes, he slowly crept back to the chair, cautiously making each step. Lana watched with a mixture of fear and anxiety. The urge to run started to fill her entire being. But to where? And it was almost dark, and she didn't have a flashlight. She added another piece of wood to the fire while she thought about her situation. She could hear him. His raspy breathing frightened her. Every time she heard him breathe in deep, she knew a newer level of hell was about to open up. The flames hit and reflected on the shiny blade of the new knife John was so proud of that was stuck in the log just in front of where he was sitting. She could hear his cackling laugh, could tell he was talking his crazy talk, words that made no sense. Things spoken to only things he could see. She knew soon he would be chasing sounds and things that only he was seeing, that weren't really there, things that only existed in his drug-induced state. Quietly, she got up from her chair, grabbing a napkin, and went to the other side of the truck. She had to go before she wet herself. Last thing she wanted was to be moving around while he was acting crazy, chasing things only he could see. Getting her clothes back where they needed to be, Lana could have sworn she heard something moving just beyond the trees. And she jumped. Damn it, now he's got me so scared, I'm even jumping at every sound. And I know better. Stepping back around the truck, she saw John standing in front of his chair, staring out into the woods in the direction of the sound that Lana had heard. It's just squirrels or a deer maybe, John. She tossed her napkin into the fire, walked to her chair, and sat down. It was then that she heard it again, behind her in the brush. Her hair on the back of her neck stood on end. John, you're making me freak out. Please, let's just go home. What do you say? I'll drive or maybe go somewhere else. Will you be more comfortable if we do that? John was froze in a crouching position, staring past Lana. At what he was staring at, she wasn't sure, but he didn't move for a few minutes, nor were there any sounds, save that of the crackling of the fire and an occasional owl. John breathed in deep, which started another round of his ungodly noises, rantings, and seeing things. At this point, Lana couldn't tell if she was hearing John or something else. He began his frantic searching for the sounds, the voices, and things he was seeing. Running through the woods, first this way, then that, but never too far, never really out of sight. Then, out of the blue, he came back to his chair, and he sat down calmly. He looked down into the knife in the log. He picked it up and he turned it around in his hand several times. He appeared to be very calm and very quiet, very much unlike the man that had just left. Be careful with that. You already cut the hell out of yourself once tonight, remember? That knife is really sharp. Lana realized that the bandage was gone from John's hand. And it looks like you've lost the bandage off your hand already. Is it bleeding? John, do you need to put another bandage on it? Lana thought maybe if I could get him to either go home or maybe I can get him to the keys and go to get help for him. Something suddenly told Lana that things were not as they seemed. Before she could do anything or say anything, the man sitting across from her held the knife in his hand and in a split second threw it at her. The knife hit her arm and she screamed in shock. "What the hell, John?" She jumped up and ran to the truck to get bandages, the knife still in her arm. She had a handful of gauze and was trying to stuff it in the sleeve of her shirt when she felt John grab a handful of her hair and slam her back against the door. The knife fell from the seat to the ground and John bent over to search for it. Lana stepped sideways, grabbed the truck door and slammed it on John. All she could do was run. She didn't know which way. Other than all she knew was she had to stay out of sight, away from the road. The warm blood was dripping from her fingers. She got in the woods and crouched behind a big tree, long enough to try to get the gauze over the wound to slow the bleeding. She looked back towards the truck, searched for any sign of John. She saw a strange pile of something in the distance that the firelight shimmered on, but she couldn't make it out. Then a movement caught her eye. He was standing crouched by the back of the truck, searching the woods for any movement from her. She felt like a sitting duck. Any sound would alert him to her direction. This concludes Chapter 2 of Follow My Shadow. I hope everyone has enjoyed this chapter. As you can see, Chapter 2 is where everything starts to pick up. And I hope everyone has a most wonderful weekend. I will put Chapter 1 in the pinned comment below. If you haven't already listened to it, please do so. And I hope everyone stays safe out there. And I want to thank all of my subscribers and welcome all of my new subscribers. Everybody, have a most wonderful weekend. Bye, guys.